welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going back in time, exploring the history of American evangelicalism and how it became such a powerful force in U.S. politics.
Yeah, a really fascinating story.
Yeah, it really is.
Full of twists and turns, you know.
Yeah.
And it's important even if you're not evangelical yourself because it helps explain so much of what's happening in America today, you know, the political landscape.
Absolutely. And we've got a whole stack of incredible sources here that we're going to dig into to try to figure out how a faith that preaches peace and love, you know, also became so intertwined with militarism and political power.
Right.
So, ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's go all the way back to the early 20th century.
Okay.
Our sources paint this picture of America grappling with a lot of change at that time.
Yeah.
Industrialization, urbanization, and the rise of a new aggressive kind of masculinity.
Oh, yeah, like Teddy Roosevelt.
Exactly.
The whole big stick diplomacy.
Yeah, and as this new ideal of manhood kind of took hold, it started to influence Christianity, too.
Oh, interesting.
And we see the emergence of what's called muscular Christianity.
Muscular Christianity.
Okay.
Which tried to sort of reconcile traditional Christian virtues with this more assertive, even combative ideal of manhood.
So does that mean like strength and courage become part of being a good Christian man?
Precisely, yeah.
Okay.
One of the key figures here is Billy Sunday,
Okay.
a former baseball player turned evangelist.
Wow.
Yeah, he was known for these really fiery sermons
Okay.
and his very passionate support for America getting involved in World War I.
Wow. So we've got a baseball star turned like fire and brimstone preacher backing a world war.
Yeah.
That's quite a combination.
It was a powerful combination.
Yeah.
And it really helped lay the groundwork for a more politically engaged and, you could say, a militant form of evangelicalism.
So how did this evolve after World War I?
Well, Billy Graham, right? He emerges in the post-World War II era as this leading figure in evangelicalism.
And he emphasized very traditional gender roles, men as protectors and leaders, women as homemakers, which really resonated especially in the Cold War era.
Right, yeah, because you have that, like, us versus them mentality.
Exactly.
With the godless communists as the enemy.
Exactly. So during this time, you see this fusion of evangelicalism with American nationalism and a real celebration of this like heroic warrior figure.
Yeah.
And it's not just preachers pushing this image either.
Okay.
You know, think about figures like the cowboy gospel singer Red Foley.
Okay.
And of course, John Wayne.
Oh, yeah, John Wayne.
Ultimate American, you know, always fighting for what's right. They all contributed to this idea of the, you know, righteous American man, a man of faith who's not afraid to fight for his beliefs.
Right.
And this image became increasingly influential in the political world.
Okay, so we've got this image of the, like, muscular Christian taking shape.
Right.
But this is also the civil rights era. So how did evangelicals engage with this whole issue of race during this time?
It's complicated.
Okay.
Many white evangelicals, particularly in the South, initially supported segregation.
Okay.
But as the civil rights movement gained momentum, you know, their approach kind of shifted.
Oh, it is.
They moved away from explicitly supporting segregation, but often focused on things like school choice and opposition to social welfare programs.
I see.
Issues that, while not explicitly about race, had these clear racial implications.
Yeah, so maybe it's like a way to sort of appeal to those who weren't comfortable with the changes the civil rights movement was bringing about.
Right.
Without being explicitly racist.
You could say that. And this shift is important because it shows how evangelicals were becoming increasingly adept at navigating the political landscape, you know, finding ways to kind of express their views on these sensitive topics without alienating potential supporters.
So we've talked about masculinity and race, but what about women? What role did they play in shaping this increasingly political form of evangelicalism?
Well, that's where someone like Phyllis Schlafly comes in.
Phyllis Schlafly, okay.
She galvanized a lot of conservative women, many of them evangelicals, to oppose the Equal Rights Amendment.
The ERA.
Yeah.
Wow. She was a force to be reckoned with.
She was.
So she's rallying women against a movement for equal rights.
It might seem counterintuitive, but she argued that the ERA threatened traditional gender roles and would actually harm women.
Interesting.
Her message resonated with a lot of conservative women. Yeah. And it highlights how anxieties about changing gender roles were really becoming intertwined with evangelical politics.
Right. So it's not just about opposing the ERA.
No.
It's about protecting a very specific vision of womanhood.
Right.
One centered on the home and family.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Schlafly's activism had a much larger impact.
Okay.
It helped to build this really powerful alliance between Roman Catholics, evangelicals, and Mormons.
Wow, what a coalition.
Yeah, a coalition that would play a major role in the rise of the religious right.
So it's not just about one issue or one group.
Yeah.
It's about building this powerful political movement.
Right.
United by these shared values and anxieties.
Exactly. And it's this movement that will become even more influential as we move into the Reagan Revolution, which, as our sources show, really embraced this idea of militant masculinity that we've been talking about.
All right, we're going to have to stop there for now, but wow, my mind is blown. John Wayne and Billy Graham, who knew?
Right. It's all connected, and it gets even more interesting as we move forward.
I bet it does.
We're going to explore how this whole evangelical embrace of militant masculinity played out in the culture wars of the 1990s and beyond after the break. Stay with us.
All right, so we're back, and before the break, we were talking about how American evangelicalism became so intertwined with this vision of masculinity.
Right. Very strong and assertive, ready to fight for its beliefs.
Yeah, and I'm curious, did this vision fade away after the Cold War ended?
You know what's interesting is it actually became even more pronounced in the 1990s.
Really? Why would that be?
Well, our sources point to this kind of growing anxiety about changing social norms, things like feminism, the shifting roles of men and women.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so this vision of the strong Christian man who's battling against forces that threaten these traditional values really intensified.
So it's like the enemy shifted from something external like communism to something more internal.
Exactly. And during this time, you see a surge in popularity of these books and movements aimed at reclaiming a very rugged, almost primal form of Christian manhood.
Oh, interesting. Any examples that come to mind?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So Wild at Heart by John Eldredge, that was a huge bestseller.
Okay, yeah, I remember that one.
It really tapped into this yearning for a more adventurous, warrior-like kind of masculinity.
Right, almost like a Christianized version of those action heroes we were talking about.
Exactly. And alongside books like Wild at Heart, you have movements like the Promise Keepers. They would hold these massive stadium rallies for men, emphasizing men's leadership in the home, in society, urging them to be strong, responsible, but also emotionally expressive.
So it sounds like there's maybe a bit of a softening happening, but still within this framework of male leadership.
Yeah, for sure. It was a way of kind of adapting to the changing times while still holding on to those core beliefs about traditional gender roles.
Right, that makes sense. And then in the early 2000s, you have figures like Mark Driscoll emerging.
Oh, yeah.
Taking this whole muscular Christianity to a whole new level.
Yeah, he really did.
Mark Driscoll, I mean, for those who don't know, he was the pastor of that megachurch in Seattle, right?
He was incredibly popular, especially among younger evangelicals, known for this very aggressive, often vulgar preaching style.
Yeah, I remember that, very much like the bad boy of pastors.
Yeah, he wore a leather jacket, had tattoos, wasn't afraid to curse in a sermon.
Wow.
He really appealed to those who felt like traditional evangelicalism was just too soft, too, feminized.
But his rise was pretty dramatic, and so was his fall.
Right.
He ended up being forced to resign from his church amidst a whole bunch of allegations of bullying, misogyny, financial impropriety, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, there were a lot of problems there. And, it does make you wonder if this pursuit of a more muscular Christianity can sometimes veer into some pretty dark territory.
Absolutely. And Driscoll's case wasn't isolated either. I mean, looking back at the sources we've got here, there's a whole string of scandals involving really prominent evangelical leaders, all of whom were sort of championing this vision of strong, authoritative manhood.
Right. It really raises these questions about this emphasis on male authority within the movement and the potential for abuse within that structure.
It really highlights the contradictions we've been talking about. On the one hand, you have this focus on family values and sexual morality.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have these high-profile leaders engaging in hypocrisy and abuse of power.
Exactly. And this brings us to what is perhaps the most perplexing chapter in this whole story.
Yeah.
The Trump phenomenon.
Okay, here we go.
How do you explain this unwavering support for Donald Trump?
Yeah.
A thrice-married, casino-owning, self-proclaimed pussy grabber among a group that supposedly holds family values So dear.
Yeah, it's quite the head-scratcher.
It really is. But if you look back at the evolution of this evangelical masculinity, it starts to maybe make a little more sense.
Yep.
There's this long-standing admiration for strong, even authoritarian leaders.
Right.
You know, the ones who project this image of dominance.
So in a weird way, Trump fits the mold of that John Wayne archetype we were talking about.
Yeah, you got it.
Interesting.
He's the tough guy, the rule breaker, the one who doesn't back down from a fight.
Right.
And for a lot of evangelicals, Trump's personal flaws were just less important than his willingness to fight for their values, to stand up to what they saw as the enemies of Christianity.
So it's about picking a champion.
Yeah.
Someone who will defend their way of life, even if that champion isn't exactly a saint.
Precisely. And figures like Jerry Falwell Jr., the son of the founder of the Moral Majority,
Right.
he was key in defending Trump.
Yeah.
They argued that character was less important than policy, that the ends justified the means.
So a very pragmatic, maybe even Machiavellian approach.
You could say that, and this willingness to kind of overlook personal failings in favor of political expediency has left a lot of people wondering about the future of evangelicalism.
Yeah, especially as younger generations are maybe less enthralled with this politically charged, muscular version of the faith.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this tension between the older generation who are very invested in these culture wars,
Right.
who are clinging to this vision of, you know, a strong patriarchal Christian America.
Yeah.
And then you have these younger evangelicals who are maybe less interested in those battles, more focused on things like social justice, environmentalism.
Yeah, it's a different set of priorities for sure.
It is, and the big question is, what happens next? Will this younger generation succeed in reshaping the movement? Or will they end up leaving and forming their own expressions of faith? And what will all of this mean for American politics?
Right, because this is a movement that's had an enormous impact on American society.
It has.
Its influence is everywhere, from foreign policy to social issues like abortion, same-sex marriage.
Sure.
So whatever happens within evangelicalism, it's going to have ripple effects throughout the whole country.
It's true. I mean, we're potentially witnessing a major shift here.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to say what the landscape is going to look like when the dust settles. But I think what is clear is that this deep dive has given you, the listener, a much deeper understanding of this very complex and influential movement.
For sure. I mean, we've really gotten into the history, the motivations, the contradictions.
Yeah.
And I think armed with that knowledge, it's easier to make sense of these political and cultural shifts that are happening all around us.
Yeah, you can see how the past is shaping the present and how the choices that are being made today are going to impact the future.
Absolutely. Well, this has been quite the journey, and we are going to unpack all of this in much more detail in the final part of our deep dive.
That's right. We're going to explore the potential implications of this generational divide within evangelicalism and what it means for the future of the movement and for American society as a whole.
So stick with us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from Billy Sunday to Billy Graham, the rise of the religious right, that whole embrace of figures like John Wayne, even megachurches, and muscular Christianity.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing how much American evangelicalism has changed and how much it's shaped American politics, really.
It's a complex story for sure, and it brings up a lot of questions about the role of faith, especially when it intersects with power, politics, all of that.
One of the things that really sticks out to me is this tension, right?
Yeah.
Between this message of love and forgiveness, which is like the core of Christianity, and this very combative approach to engaging with the world that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and our sources suggest that this tension has actually become even more intense lately, especially for those who feel like their values are really under attack.
Oh, right.
For a lot of evangelicals, this feeling of being embattled, of being in a cultural war, a spiritual war, that's become a big part of who they are.
So it's not just about politics anymore.
Right. It's about defending a whole way of life, a vision of America that they feel like is slipping away.
And that helps explain why they were so drawn to a figure like Donald Trump, right?
Exactly, yeah. Despite all of his personal flaws, he was seen as a fighter, someone who'd protect their interests.
But what happens when that fighter, that champion, turns out to be not so champion-like after all? I mean,
Yeah.
we talked about the scandals, the hypocrisy, the abuse of power, and this is all happening among the very leaders who pushed this vision of strong, authoritative manhood.
Right. It's a really tough question, and it's one that's causing a lot of soul-searching within the movement.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Some people are doubling down, arguing that character just doesn't matter as much as policy, that the ends justify the means. But other people are starting to wonder if this whole pursuit of political power has come at the cost of their core values.
It's like they're realizing that maybe the movement itself has strayed from its original mission, right?
Yeah, like maybe they've lost sight of something really important along the way.
And this is all happening at the same time that you have this generational divide within evangelicalism, right?
Right.
I mean, the younger generation seems a lot less interested in the culture wars. They seem more focused on things like social justice or climate change.
Yeah. They're looking for a different kind of Christianity, one that's more about compassion and inclusion and less about, constantly fighting enemies.
Yeah, it's a different set of priorities.
Yeah, and they're questioning the choices of the older generation.
Right.
Wondering if all this focus on political power has actually alienated the very people they're supposed to be reaching.
Right.
It's a really fascinating shift, and it could have a huge impact on the movement.
So where does this leave us? What's next for American evangelicalism?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Will this younger generation change the movement from within?
Right.
Or will they just leave and start their own thing?
Yeah.
And how will all of this affect American politics? It's hard to say.
Because, like we've been saying, this movement has had a massive impact on American society.
It really has.
I mean, it's everywhere, from foreign policy to social issues.
Right.
So whatever happens within evangelicalism, it's going to have ripple effects for the whole country.
It's true. We might be seeing a tectonic shift happening right now.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to predict what things will look like in the end, but hopefully this deep dive has given you, the listener, a better understanding of this really complex and powerful movement.
Absolutely. We've explored its history, its motivations, even its contradictions.
Yeah, and with that knowledge, you're better equipped to make sense of the changes happening all around you.
Yeah, you can see how the past connects to the present and how the choices we make today will shape the future.
Exactly. So keep being curious, keep asking questions, keep trying to engage with these issues in a thoughtful way, because this story, the story of American evangelicalism, it's still being written.
It is, and understanding it is a key part of understanding America itself.
That's right.
Well, thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive, and we'll see you next time.